What's going on, everybody? And today we're going to be talking about the biggest challenge that Apple as a company is facing in the next 12 months that can have a significant impact on their stock price. And that challenge is regulatory situation going on in the EU, the European Union. They're having stronger regulations on large tech companies, and that includes Apple. They want Apple to open up their ecosystem. As you know, they're also involved in a lawsuit with the United States government where they're facing this same challenge, but the EU is more specifically trying to rein in monopolies, and one of those monopolies is Apple. And Apple has what we know as a closed ecosystem. Now, what does that mean? That means that any app installed on an Apple phone must go through the Apple App Store. So that means that if you have a third-party app, you couldn't just download it and install it onto their phone. And what that also means is that any app that's of value that gets lots of people, Apple gets a cut of that money. So a large segment of their revenue comes from the fact that they have this closed monopoly on their ecosystem, on their device. And basically the European Union have new laws in place that if you don't change that, you're paying fines. Right now, Apple have already paid significant fines to the EU, which is basically affects their bottom line. Obviously, if you're paying billions of dollars of fines, that comes off of your net profit every year. And so either they're going to end up changing their rules, which can have a structural effect on Apple as a whole, because obviously now if other people could install apps from third parties, that means you can download other apps, you can download apps that are free, and ultimately that takes their control away from their environment and their experience, but it also threatens their revenue. That's less revenue that they're making. Right now, every app that comes through the App Store that's worth paying for, they get a cut of that, and that affects their bottom line. So that's their biggest threat in the 12 months. And these negotiations and these navigations of these rules in the EU are happening right now. So if you're an investor of Apple stock and you want to be paying attention to what's going on over there, because if these rules get put in place, or if it gets solidified that they're going to continue to pay these large fines, then that's going to change your revenue projections on what's going to happen in the next 12 months when it comes to Apple stock. So that's the biggest challenge in the next 12 months I see that they're facing. But let's get a little deeper into the implications of this. Now, just for some historical context, the EU is a significant portion of Apple's business. Obviously, this is a luxury brand that's selling to people with expendable income in the West, and the EU is in the West. So it makes up over 26% of their revenue every year. So this is a big deal that the European Union is trying to change their rules. So this is not really a place they can say, hey, you're changing your rules, we'll no longer sell there. They're going to have to negotiate and deal with the European Union when they make up over a quarter of their overall revenue every year. So this is not something they could just walk away from or say, forget you guys, like a smaller nation. Here's the thing. This all started with a legal battle with Spotify. And in the European Union, they ultimately felt like Spotify brought up a very important thing, that Apple was basically participating in monopolistic competition. In March of 2024, Apple was fined over $2 billion. And that's a lot of money. For some companies, that can be all their revenue for the year. So if this is expected to continue to move on into the future, you can expect these hefty fines. But there's even bigger implications, because if Apple give into this pressure and allow other apps on their actual app store, this will fundamentally change their business model. A large portion of their revenue comes from the app store ecosystem, like almost 30% of their revenue. So if you can reduce that down to 10 or 15%, you're talking about billions of dollars of loss for the company. Right now, the European Union is still deliberating. They have something called the Digital Marketing Act. And over the next 12 months, they could solidify these rules and impose them onto Apple. So you want to be watching for this whole debacle in the European Union when it comes to antitrust litigation, because if these rules get put in place, Apple is not going to back out of this market that represent 26% of their revenue, which means that even in the short run, they're going to comply. And then even in the long run, if they end up fighting this stuff, it's going to take a couple years before they make any headway. So either way, if you're looking for something that can significantly affect the stock price in those 12 months, you want to pay attention to what's going on when it comes to the Digital Marketing Act and the proceedings that are going on. You want to be constantly looking up what's happening, because that's going to affect their stock price. The market will react to some information that can fundamentally shift their business model and or impose hefty fines that they can expect for years to come. Now, I want to be clear, the Digital Marketing Act is separate from what's going on that could affect Apple's stock price in the next year. They actually have some pending appeals with the European Union. And if they lose, they can be set to owe $15 billion in back taxes and fines that they'll be actually having to pay to Ireland and other parts of the European Union. So in the next year, you want to be paying attention to this, because you're going to want to know if they're going to have to be imposed with those fines, because that's going to be baked into the financial projections, and that could affect the stock price going up or down. $15 billion is a large chunk of money to have a liability to pay. And just to be clear, other companies who pay significant fines, they have a free month to pay these fines. But even if they negotiate some drawn out terms, there's interest involved. The point is that the market is going to adjust for this. So you definitely want to keep track of what's going on with these pending appeals when it comes to the European Union and back taxes to Ireland. Now, I want to be clear, at this point, Apple haven't actually paid out any money. These are fines that are imposed, and they're currently appealing and fighting them. But the result of these fines could happen in the next year, and they have wide-reaching implications, and you want to follow. Just to give you an understanding of how Apple looks at all this, I'm going to read you a quote from Tim Cook. There are good parts of tech regulations, and there are parts that are not in the best interest of the users. One example of the latter is side loading on the iPhone, an alternative way of getting apps on the device. This would destroy its security and privacy initiative we have built into the Apple Store. So if you listen to Tim Cook, he has security concerns about the quality of their products. If you're able to push apps onto their phone, all the money that Apple spends on security can be compromised. Part of the reason why the App Store is so closed and controlled is because he's trying to control both hardware and software to give users a great experience. And there's lots of security risks involved with letting people basically install any apps they want. That's why Microsoft has so many breaches and so many hacks and needs so much virus scanning software, because Microsoft and Android is an open platform. They basically let you install almost anything you want. So that means that if you're downloading some low quality app from, anywhere, it could have a virus on there. It could have ransomware on there. It could have spyware on there. And that's what allows all these data breaches you're seeing. They're typically done on computers or Androids because of this. And Tim Cook's understand that a large portion of his business is contingent on that safety. So the European Union is thinking about competition and fairness and saying, hey, look, this app store don't let other people in the store easily. You're taking cuts of all the apps. But really, at the real value of Apple's brand is really about control and managing security to give people that experience that they love. And that's how he's pushing back on this, that this is not solely greed or them wanting to make all the money by forcing you to pay fees to get in their app store. This is about controlling their ecosystem and keeping the high quality that allow them to be the largest company in the world. So I do agree with him here, but I think we're at a point in the tech cycle that it's going to be very difficult for these companies to maintain, especially if you look at the last few years. There's a lot of leftist ideology that permeates the world right now when it comes to antitrust. You got Lina Khan, who's going after companies with the FCC. And so a lot of companies have this anti-monopolistic view of these large tech companies. And really a lot of this is because of companies like Facebook, Twitter, and Google, who got so big, who control so much of the market that the government, politicians are threatened. And even some regular citizens are threatened too, when they're getting censored, when your channels are getting removed from YouTube. So this sentiment is permeating throughout the West, and these companies are finally getting brought under control. So this may be something that Apple may not fully walk away from. They're probably going to end up paying fines. They're probably going to have to make some concessions in their rules and allow a pathway for their ecosystem to actually open up. Now, What does that mean for the company in the next year? Well, in the next year, if this decision is made, your investors are going to start baking this into their decision making. Hey, if they got to pay $14 billion, they're going to say, hey, that's $14 billion of less revenue this year. That could have a downward pressure on the stock. Or for opportunists, that could be an opportunity for you to buy the stock. So just be following what's going on with Apple in the European Union for the results of that. So just to let you know how serious this is for Apple, I'm going to read you about 3 quotes from experts in the industry for you can get an idea of what experts are thinking and what some of the experts in the European Union are thinking about this whole debacle, for you can assess how serious you should take this even in the next 12 months if these appeals and these results or these new rules are implemented. So let's start with a quote from the European Commissioner of Competition. We have a large number of Apple issues. I find them very serious. I was very surprised that we would have such suspicions of Apple being non-compliant. We have another one from Ben Thompson, technology analyst. The EU Digital Marketing Act is a direct challenge to Apple's control over its ecosystem. The requirement to allow alternative app stores could fundamentally alter Apple's business model. Then finally, we have a quote from an industry analyst named Horace. Apple's approach to privacy and security is at odds with the EU's push for more open platforms. Navigating this regulatory landscape will be a significant challenge for the company. So even experts see this as a significant challenge. And I really believe it is too, because if you think about it, there's some parallels going on with the EU challenge and the challenge happening in the United States. Now, just to give you a couple of parallels of what's going on in the United States, there's 3 areas that Apple is getting challenged by the DOJ, the Department of Justice. That's similar to what's happening in the EU. Number one, when it comes to developers, if you're an app store developer and you create an app and you put it into their store, their policies don't really allow you to create a link on your app where you can take them outside of the Apple ecosystem for them to make payments. And so they want all transactions, even when you build your own app, to run through their Apple App Store for they can get a cut. And they feel that that's monopolistic competition. Also, they have the same thing when it comes to Apple Pay. Apple Pay allows you to essentially use your phone to make payment that's linked to your credit card. Well, other credit card providers like Chase and Bank of America have a version of a pay app similar to similar to Samsung, where you can do the same thing. And they're saying, hey, you got to open this up because this phone is the operating infrastructure, and customers are not able to take advantage of these other services when they're on your phone. So what's the big takeaway from all this? And to wrap this up in a bow for you could really understand why Apple is really facing these antitrust litigation and why is it happening? Well, essentially, if you go back to the 90s where Bill Gates and Microsoft were facing this, before Apple computer really took off, there was really no competitor to the personal PC or Windows. And because of that, Windows, the operating system, basically controlled the entire world of computing. So if you need to go on the internet and you wasn't allowed to use any other browser other than Internet Explorer, your entire experience of the internet was controlled by Microsoft. And ultimately, the goal of the DOJ or even the European Union is saying that having choice and competition is good for everyday citizens. And even though Windows and Microsoft is a great company that provides a great product, is it best for society to allow one company to control and dominate the environment when it comes to everybody else? And this same argument is getting applied to Apple today. If you think about it, there's really only 2 operating systems people use. It's either Apple's iPhone operating system, iOS, or it's Android. They dominate and represent almost 90% of all usage. So they're looking at Android, who's open, who allows you to install different apps. Developers can basically do whatever they want. You can pretty much put any app on the phone. There's no limitations. And they're saying, hey, look, Apple, you're like representing a large, almost 50 or 40% of all phones in the world and people using them. And you're controlling the interface. You're controlling the experience. You're controlling if people are able to make mobile payments using Apple Pay or maybe Chase Pay. You're controlling if developers want to add a link where somebody can go pay them for their app. Everything has to go through Apple. You're controlling the entire ecosystem from start to finish. And they're saying, hey, look, at this point, you're a public good. you're the operating system for the world when it comes to phones, and we can't allow you to close your ecosystem off like this because it's not what's best for consumers. And so this is a macro argument that Microsoft didn't fully win, and I suspect that Apple won't fully walk away from this either. They're going to change. Their business model will be threatened because a large portion of their revenue is coming from, almost 30% of their revenue is coming from this tight control over their environment. But this also has risks on their quality brand perception, because at the end of the day, if they're able to install all these apps on their phone, like I said before, that's why Windows and Android have so many scams, so many hacks, so many data breaches. Because when you get allowed to install all these random apps on your phone, it's more likely that somebody can put something on their phone that is from a unfamiliar developer, a suspicious developer, and that's how your data hacks happen. So this is something that you want to keep watching that can have a profound effect on the stock price. So my recommendation is go online and find out, follow the European Union, follow Apple's investor website, or just follow major business news and be looking for any results or proceedings or rulings when it comes to Apple's appeal to the European Union, because that can affect the stock price in the next year. My name is Arif Shabazz. Thank you for your time.